Giba is unique in the type of model that was used to set it up, firstly as an environmental precinct, and then ultimately, what has been recently achieved in the last couple of years, the formal proclamation of the area as a nature reserve. And the origins really start with interested and concerned landowners that had a passion about the gorge, wanting to prevent any unnecessary development in the gorge and preserve what was apparent to all from a biodiversity perspective to be particularly important. At the same time, the city had developed an important environmental function that was developing over that time and starting to look at new tools to proactively protect biodiversity in an urban context. And they came across a specific tool called a special rating area tool, which is embedded within a specific piece of legislation within the municipality. And essentially what it does is that it relies on landowners contributing a certain amount in addition to their normal property taxes, as well as the municipality, who owns significant amounts of land within the gorge, contributing towards the co-management of the site. Being formally proclaimed means essentially it's protected from development in perpetuity. Getting to that process has been a long one. It's more than a decade in process that has gone from literally from the beginning of the special rating area and a few individuals that have been concerned about the natural environment, to getting full-time management in the gorge, developing of management plans, purchasing land for conservation and expanding that conservation estate, and then finally taking it through the proclamation process and having it gazetted by the MEC Environment. Durban itself sits within a biodiversity hotspot. There are 36 of them globally. These biodiversity hotspots are typically associated with a natural environment that is under significant amount of threat, is unique in that it has a number of species that are endemic, which means that they're only from a certain area. And like I mentioned, they're under significant threat. They've already lost much of the habitat that would support those species, and much of the remaining species are considered to be endangered or critically endangered. What I'm surrounded by now is the old growth eastern scarp forest that exists in the gorge and is home to a number of very important species. If you're walking around the gorge, you need to watch where you step because there's something called a ruby-footed millipede. It only occurs in Giba in surrounding forests in the area. There's nowhere else in the world. In addition, there's some obviously very charismatic species like our crowned eagle and crowned eagle nests that occur within the gorge. On the grassland side of things, there's a number of endemic and highly threatened plant species. In terms of that vegetation type, there's less than 10% of what originally was there. A site like Giba, which is around 200 hectares in extent, starts to shine as an important site, not only within Durban, but also from a national and even global scale, given the uniqueness of the biodiversity. When you consider that this is situated in an urban context, it is quite amazing. You're getting species like caracal, which are small to medium-sized cats that you would not normally associate with an urban type environment. Other large and small mammals you'll find in the gorge include common duiker, blue duiker, which is a threatened species within the forests of KZN, bush pig, porcupine. There's a whole host. This close to an urban environment you wouldn't expect to necessarily find. There's a concept in the conservation field called ecosystem services, which is the services that are provided by nature to humans free of charge. And that can be monetized in many ways. In terms of Giba, it's a particularly interesting concept in that much of the value that we see associated with ecosystem services is linked to amenity value, and in this context, property values associated with being adjacent to well-managed conservation areas. When you start looking at the total value of conservation within Durban conservation areas, it's in the region of around 48 billion rand. That is a total asset value. Much of that is driven by that amenity value, being close to natural environments, and particularly important, well-managed natural environments. So you've got a natural feedback mechanisms, both in terms of property value, but also in terms of biodiversity protection. And marrying those two, which Giba has done, has been a particularly successful model and a sign of what should be done in other areas. There's also intrinsic value associated with the natural environment, the sense of well-being that you can't necessarily monetize, the impact psychologically that it has on people when they enter these types of spaces, and that is going to be an important tool that we use when people are starting to recover from the impact of this pandemic and from a mental health perspective. Giba is a natural area that's situated in an urban context, and it is a relatively pristine natural area in an urban context, which makes it even more special. It is considered a gem. Obviously it has a massive role to play in terms of recreation, significant amount of mountain bikers, hikers, bird watchers. There's a whole range of people that utilize this area. Education is key for our youth to be able to engage with the natural world. Just that feeling that you get from walking through the natural world is unrivaled. I'd like to see the gorge used to its maximum potential in many ways. So not only from a recreational perspective, but also from a training perspective. We've got so many universities and things that are in the area that have a focus on environmental sciences, nature conservation, etc. It would be nice to bring them in, not only from learning from a management perspective, but also from a research perspective, helping us understand more about what is in Giba. The reality is that every time a research group enters the gorge, they find new species. So there's a whole lot of adventure still and exploration to be done within the gorge, even though it has been around for so long. If local governments are looking for a type of model that encourages private-public partnerships, this is one that should be considered, particularly cost-effective, has the community involved, takes advantage of all the skills and expertise associated with the community, typically at reduced rates or even free of charge. And from a financial perspective, makes complete sense. From a sense of place and community perspective, it makes sense. And from a conservation perspective, it makes all the sense in the world.